on and on. So it's hard to say. But here's the problem with saying, well, Richard must be the one who's responsible for this.
Yeah.
In history, it's always written by the people who win the wars.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Richard was only on the throne for, I believe, two or three years.
Yeah.
He died in August of 1485. So he wasn't there very long. And this is the time when they're going through the War of the Roses, which is a giant battle between two sides of the family. They got really down and dirty.
Yeah.
His Richard III's side of the family lost out, and history was written over them. There's things about Richard that aren't exactly true, that are just accepted commonly as having to be the truth, such as
kind of like a lot of the propaganda that you're fed today, in the media. I mean,
right.
There's so much untruth out there.
And the thing is that one of the things that you hear is that he had a humped left or right shoulder. In other words, he was physically deformed. And there are paintings of him where he's got a humped shoulder. They've actually done X-ray analysis of those paintings, and they were altered at some point after the fact to match that description.
Although when they actually discovered his his bones, not his corpse, as I'm sure you're aware, and you're going to tell our listeners, they discovered his corpse recently. His bones again, underneath the car park.
He did have his back,
and he had severe scoliosis. So it's quite possible that his portraiture that was done while he was king, it was like tactfully readjusted to look normal.
Yeah.
And
then somebody went back and said, we'll really make this look like. Yeah, that's very, very likely a possibility. The other thing is that Richard lost the battle and was killed. It's the Battle of Bosworth Field is where he's killed. And Henry VII takes over. He was on the Tudor side of the family. So again, this opposite side that didn't like his side. And Henry VII, over the course of his reign, systematically went through and wiped out the majority of the people that were on, I believe it's the York side of the lineage. We don't know how much of the information that's out there that says that Richard III is guilty and the one who ordered it is true, because it could be propaganda.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, I say that, like, they're 13 and 9, and I think, I don't know a 13-year-old that, like, their father died of natural causes. Everybody says you don't have a legitimate thing. You just, like, take him in and you treat him really well and give him a lot of land. The chances, treat him like your own son, the chances of him coming back and saying, no, I am the rightful king, I just don't feel like they're that big. And maybe they are, maybe they were, maybe he was showing that, but then you kill both of them? Why?
Because if you kill the elder, the younger becomes...
Yeah, you're right. And 9-year-olds are really, really good at holding grudges.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that, especially, you got to look at the royals of Europe, the royal families. They were basically crime families.
Yeah.
They were like, they were like the Corleones. And so the backstabbing,
the infighting
was intense and deadly.
And continuing.
And deadly. So the idea that Richard could have taken them in, treated them just or come back and stab them in the back, try to take the throne away. Of course they would.
Yeah,
I mean, they're royalty.
Fair.
That is the way it's done.
Yeah.
That's fair.
The way business is practiced.
Fair. Sorry.
So the next up on the list is a fellow by the name of James Tyrrell, I believe is if you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
He was a loyal knight to the House of York. He served under Richard III. Evidently, he was quite loyal to Richard, though eventually he did leave England and went to France. And when he came back, he was leading a revolt against the monarchy. He came back in 1501. Which
so it was the Tudors at that point.
It was the Tudors at that point. So we've got Henry VII is on the crown. And his rebellion doesn't go so well, and he's captured. And
never a good idea back in those days.
And in his interrogation, which is actually torture.
That's what we call it. It's enhanced.
Oh, man. Yeah. No, it's more than that, though. In those days, like, what we do these days, like, whatever, we do some really horrible stuff, but what they did, the worst.
Yeah, I got to say, if I had to choose between that and waterboarding, I mean, I'm not going to whine. I ain't going to whine about waterboarding.
No.
That's a pretty civilized torture.
Well, during his interrogation, he supposedly confessed to killing the princess.
I would have too. If somebody were doing that to me right now, I would be like, yeah, I killed them.
Yeah,
that's right.
500 years ago.
That was 500 years ago. I don't care. I killed them.
Jesus. Yeah, I'll confess to anything. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's the problem. And, you know, the thing is that we know the information gotten out of torture is not reliable.
No.
And the other issue with it is that there's only one writing or one recording of this confession, and it was written 30 years afterwards.
Oh.
It was a fellow by the name of Thomas More wrote this and said that this is what came out of it. But he's the only one to ever write it, so we don't, again, have a whole lot of support to say how true it is.
There weren't official transcripts of the interrogation?
No.
They didn't record it?
No, they didn't voice
no.
record
Are
it
you
at
kidding
that
me?
time.
Well, they didn't use their smartphones? Come on, man.
I know. It is, however, from the writing of that confession, at least from what I can gather, when you hear the story told and you hear the murder of the princess told, it tends to go that they were smothered with a pillow in their sleep. So three men went into their room and smothered them.
It takes 3 of them. They're 13 and 9. 3 grown men. Better. I mean, you know,
Well,
better safe than
That's
sorry.
pretty wussy, I gotta
Tyrrell here, he said that he and 2 other men were the ones who did it upon the orders of the then King Richard III.
Yeah.
Now,
And did he give a time frame for that?
no,
You know, was it before Richard?
well, it was in 1483.
Okay.
It was that first summer that they were in London. Unfortunately, he also couldn't say where the boys were buried, which is an issue. He said somebody else just took care of the bodies. Was his way of getting out of having that piece of information.
And that's actually legitimate. I mean, in a sense, although I'm not so sure that the bones found in the tower are the princes, because it would actually make a lot more sense to get rid of the bodies and transport them far away.
Or burn them or something.
Or bury them under a set of stairs so nobody finds them for 200 years.
Yeah, but obviously they were found, whereas if you took
But
them out...
by the time they were found, it didn't affect anybody who was alive at that
Were they
point.
found?
of
I'm
course.
sorry. Were they found just chilling under the stairs, or were they encased in rock or like?
They were
what?
buried in the dirt.
They were in a box.
They were in a box
Yeah.
in the dirt.
Yeah.
Under the stairs.
Well, I gotta say though, the
Under
tower
a
is right next to the
code.
Thames. If they had just taken them out and pitched them into the river, they would have been. That would have been.
But
nobody would bat an eye in those days at a corpse floating down the Thames.
True, but people would see you leaving with the corpses of children, which were not things that usually left to the tower grounds. So there's an issue with that. I know where you're headed with it, and I like it, and it makes sense. It's simpler, but I can also think we don't want any witnesses at all, because people just never stop talking about things they see.
Absolutely.
And we just don't want this talked about.
Especially in England.
But I mean, yeah. But the whole thing about it is, I'm not saying you just walk out with a corpse slung over your shoulder. You stuff them in a barrel or something like that first, and then you put them on a.
Bring out your dead!
Yeah, you stuff them in a barrel and put them on a hand truck, and just wheel them up to the front gate. And it says, "I'm going to take back this empty and get us a full one."
Yeah.
And then nobody's going to bat an eye at that.
True. That is a possibility, but it doesn't seem to be the way it happens. So let's move on to our next suspect, which is a guy by the name of Henry Stafford. Stafford, at the time, this is again 1483, was another very popular supporter of Richard III. He then very quickly changed allegiances and is said to have tried to mount a rescue for the princes. And upon discovering that they were already dead through some means, I don't know what that is, switched his allegiance then over to Henry Tudor, Henry VII, and he was quite quickly captured and executed in 1483.
So now he is considered a possibility for the murderer?
Yes, because it's possible that he went ahead and he's the one who actually killed the boys to weaken Richard III's stance, because, oh, look at this guy. We want this guy as king. He killed children. Again, to undermine his reputation.
Okay.
But for me, the timeline on this doesn't work, because he
agree.
was executed for treason on November 2nd of 1483. So that, even if he did supposedly try to mount this rescue, that would mean the boys had to have been dead months prior to that. So basically, June. They had to have been killed right around the time that Richard said, "I'll take the throne."
Well, pretty much when they arrived.
Well, so
at the
now,
Tower of London.
if this guy was the killer,
Henry Stafford?
Henry Stafford.
Mhm.
Okay, so if this guy Henry Stafford was the killer, then and he mounts this raid, so obviously that he killed them months before. He stashed the bodies somewhere, so he wanted to like mount this raid, go in, find the bodies of the children, put on theatrical show shock and everything like that, right? And strengthen his side. Is that the idea behind the theory?
No, the theory is that he was going to mount a rescue and rescue the princes to restore them to the throne.
Yeah. So.
But when he found out that they were dead, he turned around and supported the Tudors.
No, but the theory of him killing.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Theory of the killing.
That is one way that theory has gone, is that he went in and had them killed to then mount this supposed rescue and discover them already
discover their
dead.
corpses. But
Yes.
yeah, there is one big flaw with the logic of that theory. Which is
How do you know they're under the stairs?
Well, exactly. How exactly do you know where to look for their little corpses? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a gigantic issue there.
Yeah. So.
So next up on the lineup, and I admit this is a very tenuous theory.
Is it Shakespeare?
No.
Oh.
No. Shakespeare
Damn it.
is actually the reason that Richard III kind of is also revered as a villain, but
Yeah.
He was
that
kind
he
of a
is not
propagandist,
considered
yeah.
one of the people who could have killed the princess.
Oh.
So, no, I'm afraid not. No, this one is Margaret Beaufort. She is the mother of the future King Henry VII.
King Henry is a Tudor.
Yes. People say that it is possible that she, from afar, orchestrated and ordered their deaths in order to help solidify her son's claim to the throne.
Huh.
That makes
Now,
sense.
it makes sense, except that if you see the way that how far away from the throne Henry was at that time, it really seems like a serious stretch to me.
I don't know. He took the throne like a couple years later, right? So his claim couldn't have been that weak.
He didn't have the strongest claim in the world, and really by having killed the king and asserted himself as king and taken power is sort of how he went ahead and validated.
Well, I guess.
That's kind of like par for the course.
That's kind of, yeah, it's he who holds the crown
Yeah.
wins.
So I guess, if we're gonna look at this in terms of, it's one thing to like go into like actual battle with a king that is a grown man. It's another thing to like murder 2 children. So if you're gonna say, okay, what's the best way to get this person off of the throne and reassert our family's claim to the throne? Well, you vilify the current king.
Yes.
And at the same time, 2 birds, 1 stone, get rid of the actual legitimate claim to the throne of these sons.
Yeah.
So you murder the sons and frame it like it was Richard
Well,
the third, and then, so there will be a certain public, there will be a certain like voice in the back of people's heads thinking like, well, they disappeared. Maybe he killed them. He's the kind of guy who would have killed them.
Devin, that's
and
exactly why she's on the list.
Yeah.
I just personally find it to have too many convenient leaps.
And
Well,
you know what? It's weird that I like this one more than I like Richard III.
Yeah,
I recognize
You've just got a
that.
soft spot in your heart for Richard, that's all.
I think it's
Yeah.
because I would have probably done what Margaret did.
Okay.
Like,
Well,
Well, I mean, she
That's
could have
scary.
been part of an overarching conspiracy to bring Henry VII to the throne. But so the question is like, let's say she had a hand in it. So it could go a couple of different ways. Her agents could murder the princess and then dispose of the body. So they effectively have disappeared. And so at that point, doesn't Richard mount like a little search and rescue inside the tower to find the kids and find out where the hell they went to? Doesn't he like start interrogating and torturing all the various people who would have had access to them?
you would think, but
If he cared.
if he was worried about that, but we
Maybe.
never heard of that happening.
Well, but seriously, he's he might not be sad and sorry that the kids are gone, but he recognizes that their death presents a serious problem.
And he's got to find the mole,
or their
so to speak.
or their disappearance creates a serious issue.
I wonder if he just assumed that like their mother came and got them. Or
Picked him up
like that.
from school.
yeah.
Had a note.
I mean, obviously not that, right? But that somebody helped. I don't know.
So you would think that somebody would have noticed and somebody would have. So again, if say they were murdered and their little corpses were found there, then Richard could, like, I guess that's in a sense you're kind of putting a turd in his pocket, because you've gone and you murdered the kids, left their bodies there, and now Richard and his agents look at that and think, well, everybody's going to be looking at us. I guess we should like sweep this under the rug.
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, people didn't tend to come out and cry wolf.
Well,
You didn't air that laundry.
so let me just, play devil's advocate here, right? So, okay, Richard does mount a secret search, right? Because he's not going to be like, we lost the princes, oh no! Because that's a bad idea for publicity. So he mounts a search. He finds out they've been murdered, and he says, there's literally no way I can spin this so that people believe it wasn't me.
Yeah, probably.
So let's just ignore it. And
let's just sweep it out of the rug.
I think that's the way that you kind of have to do it sometimes.
Yeah.
And that brings us to our final potential culprit,
Yeah.
the man himself, Henry VII.
Yeah.
Oh.
So people say that it is possible that Henry VII had the boys killed from afar. This runs in the same vein as the theory that his mother did it.
Because he was in exile in France.
He was in exile in France at the time. Or there are theories that when he took the throne, so this is 1485, this is 2 years after the boys went to the Tower of London, that it is possible that the boys were still alive, but secreted away in the tower, and he had them killed because he didn't want them to have the legitimate claim. And the reason that the theory states that maybe they were still alive is that in July of 1485, there was a regulation issued by Richard III's household that stated the children should be together at one breakfast. It doesn't say what children. It doesn't make any reference to where or who, but people have construed that to say possibly the boys were still alive and just secreted away.
Could be that. Could be anything else too.
Yeah.
I mean, there were children. Because there were children living in the tower, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
People lived there.
People lived there. They had families. They had children.
Yeah, but
maybe all he was saying was that the children should all be at the children's table and not pestering the adults. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what he was saying.
Maybe he had them alive for a couple years to kind of suss out if, Edward was going to be like, I'm 13. I know I'm 13, but I'm the king. So let's get this going. Again, because there's different temperaments. Yeah, there definitely is a tradition of these kids coming back and murdering everybody else. But, maybe he keeps them alive for a couple of years and then decides, no, they actually are a legitimate threat. Let's kill them. Maybe, I don't know, what did Edward die of?
Edward IV?
Yeah, what did he die of?
Didn't he die of acute lead poisoning or something?
I don't know.
No,
he was sick for 3 weeks, and I could never find
that it wasn't like a sickness.
He was sick. I mean,
he was ill, but I could never find exactly what he died.
It could have been poisoning. I mean, that kind of stuff happened all the time back in those days.
I guess that question leads to, I don't know if you have this theory of, maybe they just had what he had.
Well,
and died naturally.
And we do have something to go along with that. So we'll get to that.
Okay.
I do have one little footnote here for Henry VII.
Sure.
Which is kind of funny, is that, do you remember that act that I talked about that was passed by Parliament that said the boys were not legitimate?
Yeah.
Because the marriage was not legitimate.
Titleless Regis?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, Henry VII repealed that when he took the throne.
Interesting.
Now, some people say that he did that because he didn't agree with what Richard had done. But then there's also the fact that he was courting and was going to potentially marry one of their sisters. One of the young prince's sisters to bring the houses together. And indeed, he did eventually marry somebody from the York side of the family, and
Sure.
he ended the War of the Roses
Yeah.
via blood.
And
Right.
obviously, if you want that kid to have that super lineage, then you have to reestablish the legitimacy of
Yes,
the son.
and that's
Right.
he did it so that they were legitimate again. So then when he married her, there was none of these issues again. But so that brings us to the end of they were murdered. So if the princes weren't killed, then what happened to them?
Right.
Okay, well,
they were misplaced.
They were misplaced, and they still haven't found them.
I mean,
They're the longest game of hide and seek
Ever.
ever.
I know. I mean, that happens to me all the time. You know how many times a day I lose just my glasses?
Yes.
I mean, yeah.